In the last lecture, we created our first pipe, the shorten pipe, and it's already working quite well. But it would be nice if we could allow the user to specify the number of characters at which point you want to shorten the pipe, or excuse me, shorten the value. Right now, we're always using 10 characters as a limit. This is hard coded into the pipe, and this might not be the best pipe you can build. Instead, it would be nice if we would receive a second argument in the transform method, the, let's say, limit. And this should simply be a number. Now, limit would be what you then use here in the check. So only if it's greater or if it has more characters than this limit you want to shorten it. And then of course you use limit here in your substring method too. Now with this little change, you allow the user to pass a parameter to the pipe, because now you receive a second argument in the transform method. And since you receive this second argument here, the user may pass one parameter to the pipe. You don't need to change anything else, don't need to change anything in the decorator. This is all. Now with this we can go to our app component. And if we would leave it like this, you see it's not shortened at all because we're not passing any limit. Therefore it's undefined. Therefore we always fail this check whether it is too long. Therefore we always return the original value. But if we do pass a parameter, and remember we do this by adding a colon and then the value, let's say 5. If we do this and save this, now you see we're shortening after 5 characters. And if we pick 15, now you see the first two names go through quite well because they are short enough, but these last two names are shortened. And this is how you can of course add multiple parameters. You would add another parameter simply by adding another argument here. So this would be another arg of the type you want it to be, whatever it is. And then with that added, you could simply add another colon and your second parameter. This is how you parameterize your own pipes. And of course, you could also chain them with built-in types and so on. You can use it like a built-in pipe. It's just your own pipe. So this is awesome. Let's now move on to an advanced use case and to some limitations you might face when using pipes. In the last lecture, we created our own pipe and we also allowed the user to pass a parameter. Now I want to create another new pipe because I want to show you something which might look strange at the beginning. Let's add a new element here above our unordered list, and this should be an input field. So input of type text. I want to allow the user to filter our service. For example, by status, so that once you type stable in there, you only see service with the status stable. So therefore, I need this input text field, and I want to use two-way data binding to bind it, so ng model, and bind this to filtered status, for example. This, of course, would be a new property I set up here in my component. So below all my servers, I have filtered status, which is an empty string at the beginning, filtered status like this. So if we save this, we should see this new input field here at the top. Let's maybe add a horizontal line below it just for styling reasons. And with that, we can enter something here, but of course, this does not do anything. Now I want to build a pipe which I can apply to this list somehow, which allows me to then only view the servers which do indeed fulfill the requirements here. So to do this, I will add a new pipe here. And for this, I will now use the CLI. So ng generate pipe would be the shortcut here, or just gp, and then the name of your pipe, and I will name it filter pipe. So by typing filter, this gives me also a testing file, which I don't need, but then the filter pipe here. And there you can see it also pre-populates the name here in my add pipe decorator, and it gives me this interface and, well, gives me this transform method in its most basic form. So in here, I want to allow the user to filter, and I will indeed get an argument, the first argument of this list of arguments. This will be what the user entered. So the filter string, you could say, and this will be a string. Well, and then here I want to implement some logic which allows me to only return the elements of the array which fulfill this argument or which fulfill this filter string here, where the status of the server matches this filter string, to be precise. For this, I will first of all check if value.length and value will here be the array of servers. It doesn't have to be a string. This is the first important takeaway. It can also be an array here, can be any data you output in the end. So here, I want to check if the value length is 0, so if it's empty. In which case, I will just return value, so I will basically just quit. There is nothing to display. And now after checking this, the interesting part happens. Here, I simply want to check, or I want to loop through all my items in my value. And value here will be an array, keep this in mind. And then I want to check if my status of each server matches the filter string up here. So for this, I can simply check if item.status, and of course you could write this more generic and pass the to be filtered property here as a second argument, like prop name, which is a string, and then you could simply say item prop name in square brackets. So if this equals my filter string, only if this is equal, only in this case, I want to return it. So I should add a new result array. This is an array I will use temporarily here. And I will push new items on this result array. So I will push any items on this array which fulfill my criteria here, which are, or which have a status or a prop name in general, equal to my filter string. So here I will then push item on this array and return this result array in the end. And therefore, this result array will only hold the items where the prop name I pass as a second argument here, or as a third argument actually, where this prop name or this value of the prop name is actually equal to my filtered string. Now with this, the pipe is finished. You have to make sure that it has been added to app module. The CLI did this automatically here for me. If you created it manually, make sure that you add filter pipe to declarations and add your import at the top. And then in the app component, we apply it here in the ng for loop. And this might sound strange because before we only used it in string interpolation. But keep in mind that I said at the beginning of this module that pipes transform your output. And the ng for loop is simply part of your output. Therefore, of course, you can add a pipe here too to my servers. And then I simply say filter. Of course, we need to pass two parameters here. The first parameter is the filtered status, this property which holds my string for which I want to filter. And the second argument is my prop name, so this will be a string. And this string should be status because I want to filter on the status property. Now if we save this and reload the app, you see no servers are displayed by default because no servers match this criteria. If I type stable here, you see we see the stable server, but that doesn't look correct because we should have more than one stable server. If we have a look at our app component, we get 3 stable servers. So we only view the first one. And the reason for this is simply that right now, here, I'm returning inside of this for loop. So this is a little logical mistake here. We should, of course, return outside of it and also create this array outside of it, like this. So with this change in place, now we should see that once we add stable, we see all stable servers. And once we add offline, we see the offline server. So our filter pipe is now working as expected. Now, if we wanted to see all servers, we need to adjust this code that in case our filter string is empty, so we could add this here as an OR condition at the top. If filter string equals an empty string, that then we see all servers. And now we are able to filter for whichever servers we want to see. This works great, but there is one issue we will dive into in the next video. In the last video, we created this filter pipe here, which allows us to filter our servers for their state, and it seems to work great. We do have a certain issue with it though. If we allow the user to add a new server, and I will quickly add this functionality by going to my template and by adding a line break and then a button with the classes button and button primary, where I say add server, which will execute a new method on add server like this. And then in the app component, I will quickly add this method on add server. And here I will simply take my servers, push a new server on it, and of course this will just be a generic server here, which will have the instance type of, let's say, small, a name of new server, let's keep it super simple here, a status of stable, and started could be new date and then the same date as all the other servers here. This is not the recording date as a side note, just like or how the way you want it. So with this, we are able to add a new server. And if I now click on add server, you see it's getting added here. If I filter for stable though, and I hit this button, you don't see it getting added here, but it is there. You can see if I remove the filter altogether. So I added a couple of servers and now we can filter for them again, but they weren't added whilst we had this list filtered. And this is actually not a bug. I'll quickly reload this and filter for stable again so that we can see this. If I hit enter here, as mentioned, it's not getting added, but it's there. We can see as soon as we clear our filter. Now, the reason for this behavior is that Angular is, thankfully I should say, not rerunning our pipe on the data whenever this data changes. So as soon as we change what we enter here, and even if we would only add a blank space and then remove it, we would update our pipe again, as you can see. So adding the input, or changing the input of the pipe will trigger a recalculation, will trigger the pipe being applied to the data again. But changing the data won't trigger this. And this is a good behavior because otherwise Angular would have to run this pipe or rerun this pipe whenever any data on the page changes. This would be really bad because that would cost a lot of performance, and this is also the reason why no built-in filter pipe exists, because filtering, you would say, is a pretty common task, but the Angular team decided against adding such a pipe because you typically have a high performance cost if you want to enforce it being updated even if you are in filter mode. So by default it doesn't work here, but we can force it to work. But again, be aware that the following change will make sure that whenever we change data on the page, our pipe is recalculated, you could say. So this might lead to performance issues, so you should know what you're doing, which is why I'm really emphasizing this. You can force this pipe to be updated whenever the data changes by adding a second property to the pipe decorator. It's called pure, and you can set it to false. By default, this is true and doesn't need to be added. Now, if you do this and the app reloads, let's filter for stable servers and add new servers. And now you see they get added here too. The reason simply is that the pipe now gets recalculated whenever data changes, and as mentioned before, this can lead to performance issues, but might be what you're interested in. So it is fine to use it. This is what this pure properties, therefore you can set it to false, which basically means this is not, you could say, purely focusing on whether the pipe arguments changed, but now it will also be recalculated whenever anything changes on the page. And again, this might be a bad behavior. I'm just emphasizing this because it's so important to understand. But if you know what you're doing, if you do need this behavior, definitely go ahead, set pure to false, and you are good to go. And with that, we now get a working filter pipe with this little downside of potentially hitting performance issues if we have a very long list here.